He was offering without hesitation. There was a sincerity to his gesture, a kind of gentle thoughtfulness that caught me off guard. "Well, aren't you sweet?" I replied, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "But you didn't have to do this, Jason. I can manage on my own." He shook his head, his eyes earnest. "It's no trouble, really. My mom always said it's important to look out for others, especially family. You've done a lot for me over the years, and it's about time I returned the favor." I felt a sudden lump in my throat. It wasn't the groceries or even the gesture itself, but the words he spoke, the weight they carried. It was a reminder of how much I had given over the years, and how little I had ever asked in return. Life had been a steady march of giving, whether it was to family, friends, or even strangers, and I had grown accustomed to it. But here, in Jason's simple act, I saw something I hadn't realized I was missing. Someone who genuinely wanted to give back. We moved inside, and he helped me unload the groceries, arranging them neatly on the kitchen counter. The air was filled with the faint scent of fresh produce, the earthy aroma of herbs, and the comforting hum of the refrigerator in the background. As we worked side by side, I could feel a sense of ease between us, as though the years had melted away. We didn't need to speak much. His presence was enough, and it was a kind of quiet companionship that I hadn't realized I'd longed for. Once we were done, he turned to me, his hands resting on the counter. "I've been meaning to ask," he began, his voice a little hesitant. "How have you been? Really been?" It was the kind of question that caught me off guard, the kind you don't often hear. People are quick to ask about the surface-level stuff, the weather, the latest gossip. But this was different. Jason wasn't asking about my health or my routine. He was asking about me, about how I was really feeling. And for a moment, I wasn't sure how to answer. I glanced out the window at the quiet street outside, the houses lined up like old friends watching over one another. "I've been good," I said slowly, not sure if I was telling the truth. "Busy, you know. Life keeps moving, but I've been getting by." Jason didn't press, just nodded in understanding, and for a moment the silence between us felt comfortable, like two people who had known each other for so long that words weren't always necessary. Then, as though he couldn't hold it in any more, Jason spoke again, his tone lighter this time, teasing. "I'm sure you could use a little break, though, right? All that running around. You deserve some time to relax." I chuckled, the sound light in the air. "Oh, I don't know about that. I've gotten used to the hustle. It's just the way things are now. You know, you don't have to keep doing everything alone," he said, his voice quieter now, more serious. His words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I saw something new in his eyes. It wasn't just the youthful spark I had remembered from years ago. It was a deep understanding, a wisdom beyond his years. Jason wasn't just being polite. He was genuinely concerned, and that thought alone made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. "I've got a lot of support from family, you know," I said softly, unsure if I was convincing myself more than him. I like to keep busy. Keeps my mind off things." He didn't push, but the look he gave me was one that lingered, a quiet acknowledgement of something unsaid. We stood there for a moment, both of us lost in our own thoughts, before Jason finally broke the silence. "I'm here if you ever need anything, you know." His voice was sincere, no pretense in it. "Really, you don't have to do it all on your own." And with that, the moment stretched on, and I felt something shift, something that wasn't immediately visible but was quietly changing between us. It wasn't just the groceries or the offer of help. It was something deeper, something rooted in respect and care, an understanding that life had its ups and downs, and sometimes you just needed someone to help carry the load, even if it was just for a while. Jason left a little while later, his words still echoing in my mind. I went about my day, but the sense of connection he had brought with him lingered, and I couldn't help but think about how simple gestures often held the most profound impact. Ask ChatGPT. The days after Jason's visit felt different. It wasn't just the groceries, though they were still neatly put away in the kitchen. It was the quiet shift in my heart, a subtle warmth that hadn't been there before. Jason's words, simple as they were, kept replaying in my mind. You don't have to do it all on your own. It was strange how something so small could stir up so much inside me. I'd always been someone who prided myself on independence. I never liked asking for help. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. But that morning, when he had said those words, I felt an openness, a vulnerability that I hadn't realized I was holding back for so long. I found myself thinking about the last few years, how much had changed. Time has a way of sneaking up on you, doesn't it? When you're younger, it seems like the world is full of endless possibilities. But as the years go by, you realize how much you've taken on, how much you've done without ever truly stopping to ask for help. I had spent so much of my life giving, caring, and managing everything on my own. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten what it felt like to let someone else carry part of the load. I was lost in these thoughts when I received a call from Jason a few days later. "Hey, Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice light, almost playful. "How's it going?" "Good," I replied, a smile tugging at my lips as I heard his familiar tone. "Busy as usual. How about you?" I was thinking. He paused, like he was working up to something. "Maybe I could come by again. Help you out with anything else? You know, just as a way of paying you back for all the times you helped me out when I was younger." I was taken aback for a moment. He really was persistent, wasn't he? "Jason, you don't have to keep doing that. I'm fine." "I know you're fine," he said, a chuckle in his voice. "But I'm serious. It's the least I can do. I owe you, and I want to be there for you." There was a sincerity in his voice that made it hard to say no. And if I was being honest, I was touched by his offer, more than I had expected. So, after a brief pause, I agreed. When he arrived, he didn't bring anything this time, no groceries or errands to run. Instead, he simply sat with me. We talked about everything and nothing at all. Old memories, new ideas, and plans for the future. He shared stories of his life, the things he was doing, his work, and his own little struggles. It was a conversation that felt comfortable, easy, like we had never been apart. There was something in the way he spoke, in the way he listened to me, that made me feel seen. It was refreshing, almost like a balm to the years of feeling overlooked or unheard. At one point, Jason looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know if you realize this, Mrs. Harper, but you've always been a kind of anchor for people, even when you didn't have to be. I remember growing up, every time I was around, you just make things feel more grounded, like everything was going to be okay." His words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how much I had taken on, how much of myself I had given away, without ever really acknowledging it. To be honest, it had always been a part of who I was, caring for others, putting others first. But hearing him say it made me realize just how deeply that role had shaped me. I couldn't help but chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. Well, I wasn't trying to be an anchor, just doing what felt right. Jason smiled, but there was something else in his eyes now. "You've done a lot, you know, and I think it's time you let someone else take care of you for a change." His words were simple, but they carried a weight. I didn't know how to respond at first. I wasn't used to someone wanting to take care of me. But as we sat there in the quiet of the afternoon, I began to wonder, what would it feel like to accept that? To allow myself the space to be cared for, even if it was just for a little while. Jason left a little while later, and I found myself reflecting on the afternoon. It wasn't the help he offered or the fact that he had done something for me. It was the quiet understanding he brought with him. There was something about the way he treated me, like he saw me, not just as someone who gave and gave, but as someone who needed to receive as well. Later that evening, I sat down to write a letter. I had never really done this before, but something about the way Jason had spoken to me made me realize I had a lot of things I had been holding inside, things I hadn't been able to express. I wrote about the years of giving, the things I had sacrificed without thinking twice. I wrote about how, for the first time in a long time, I was beginning to understand the importance of balance, of giving, yes, but also receiving. And as I wrote, I felt a sense of release, like something was finally being let go, something that had been quietly weighing on me for too long. I wasn't sure where this new understanding would take me, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to lean on someone else every now and then. The next time I saw Jason, I didn't thank him for the groceries or his help. Instead, I simply smiled at him, a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with what he had done for me. It was about what he had given me, something I hadn't realized I needed, permission to accept help, to let someone else carry a little of the weight. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe it was okay to stop being so strong all the time. It was okay to let someone else hold the weight for a little while. The days following Jason's visit felt like a slow unfolding of something new. I had never really allowed myself to acknowledge how much I needed connection, how much I longed to be seen and cared for. Jason had opened a door I didn't even know was closed, and now I found myself stepping into an unfamiliar space, one where vulnerability and openness weren't weaknesses, but simply parts of being human. A week after our last conversation, Jason called again. His voice, as always, was warm, but there was a hint of excitement in it that made me sit up straight. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I've been thinking. How about we go out for dinner? Just the two of us, no groceries, no errands, just a meal." The invitation took me by surprise. A dinner? Just the two of us? It wasn't that I had any reservations about Jason. It was more about the shift in the dynamic between us. We had always been in the same circle, family, friends, familiar faces, but now there was something more. There was a deeper connection, an understanding that hadn't been there before, and the thought of spending time with him outside of the usual context felt different. But the thought of it didn't make me uncomfortable. In fact, it felt right. And I realized as I agreed to the dinner that I was starting to see him not as the young man who used to be around the house when he was a kid, but as someone with whom I could share moments of genuine connection. The evening came, and Jason arrived at my door, looking dapper in a button-down shirt and casual trousers. He had grown into his own skin, his presence now more assured, and as we walked to the car, I couldn't help but notice how comfortable we seemed with each other. It wasn't forced. It was effortless, like we had always been this way. We ended up at a small, cozy restaurant with dim lighting and soft music playing in the background. The place had a quiet charm, with dark wood paneling and candles flickering on every table. It was the kind of place where you could hear the hum of conversation without it ever becoming too loud or intrusive. It felt like the perfect setting for what was unfolding between us, an intimate, private space where words carried weight, where silences were comfortable, not awkward. We sat at a table in the corner, tucked away from the bustling crowd. As the waiter brought over menus, Jason leaned forward, his eyes focused on me. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, I've always admired how strong you've been. I don't think I ever really told you that. I mean, it's not just about everything you've done for others. It's the way you've carried yourself through it all. Most people don't get it, but I do." His words took me by surprise, hitting me in a way I wasn't prepared for. There was an honesty in his tone, a depth that made me pause. It wasn't just flattery. It was genuine appreciation, the kind of acknowledgement that cuts through the surface-level niceties we're used to in day-to-day life. "I don't think I've ever really thought of it that way," I said a little sheepishly. "I've just done what needed to be done." Jason smiled, a soft, understanding smile. "That's what makes it all the more remarkable. You don't do things for recognition, and that's rare. But sometimes I think you forget to take care of yourself." I lowered my gaze for a moment, processing his words. He was right, of course. I had always put others first, always kept busy with work and family, always moving forward without asking for much in return. But sitting here with Jason, feeling the warmth of his presence, I realized how much I had neglected myself in the process. "So, what about you?" I asked, trying to shift the focus away from me. "How's life treating you these days?" Jason leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful for a moment before answering. It's been interesting. I've been figuring out what I really want in life, what matters. It's a process, but I'm getting there." There was a subtle vulnerability in his voice, a quiet openness that made me respect him even more. I could see that Jason wasn't just the same person I had known before. He had grown, just as I had, and he was now navigating his own path, trying to make sense of what came next. It was a journey I recognized, one I was still on myself. We spent the rest of the evening talking about life, about choices, about dreams we once had and those we were still chasing. There was something deeply personal in the conversation, something that went beyond surface-level pleasantries. It was as though we were both shedding the layers we had built over the years, the ones that kept us safe, but also kept us distant. By the time dessert arrived, I realized how much I had enjoyed the evening, how much I had missed this kind of connection. The kind that didn't require pretense or masks, the kind that allowed you to simply be who you were, flaws and all. And I found myself thinking, not for the first time, that maybe it was time to let go of some of the walls I had built around myself, to allow myself to be a little more vulnerable, a little more open to what life had to offer. Jason walked me to the door that evening, his presence filling the space with a quiet sense of comfort. As I turned to say goodbye, he gave me a soft, meaningful smile. "I'm glad we did this," he said. "You deserve to be cared for, Mrs. Harper. Never forget that." And as I watched him leave, I stood there for a moment, letting his words wash over me. There was a quiet sense of gratitude in my chest, not just for the evening, but for the realization that maybe, just maybe, it was time to embrace the help I had always been too proud to accept. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't just about Jason or his words. It was about me, about learning to allow myself to be taken care of, to accept the kindness others were offering. It wasn't weakness, as I had always believed. It was simply part of being human. And as I closed the door behind me, I couldn't help but feel a little lighter. Maybe Jason was right. Maybe it was time to stop doing everything on my own. The weeks that followed Jason's visit seemed to unfold in a way I hadn't expected. Something had shifted inside me, something deep and quietly transformative. I started noticing little changes in my everyday life, small moments where I allowed myself to lean into the kindness of others, to open up in ways I hadn't done in years. One afternoon, I was sitting at my kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the window, when the phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and saw Jason's name. It had become a familiar sight over the past few weeks, and with each call, I found myself looking forward to hearing his voice, to sharing these small moments of connection. "Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice full of that same warmth I had come to recognize. "I was thinking, maybe you'd like to take a little trip. Just a short weekend getaway. No errands, no obligations, just time to relax. I found a place by the lake, really peaceful. Thought it might be nice for both of us." The idea of a getaway felt foreign at first. I had spent so much time over the years taking care of everything, never allowing myself the luxury of true relaxation. The thought of a trip, of stepping away from my routine, was both exciting and a little intimidating. But there was something in Jason's voice, something that made me realize this wasn't just about a vacation. It was about the opportunity to finally take a step back, to give myself the chance to breathe. I don't know. I hesitated, the part of me that always felt responsible, always felt like I had to be doing something, holding me back. I'm not sure if I can just leave everything behind. "I get it," Jason said, his voice understanding but firm. "But you've been carrying so much for so long. You've done enough. You deserve this." His words hung in the air, and for a moment I was quiet. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had been carrying too much, too long. Maybe it was time to let go, if only for a short while. Slowly, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, the kind that comes from knowing it's okay to let someone else take the reins, even if just for a moment. "I'll think about it," I said, finally allowing myself to consider it as more than just a fleeting idea. The next day, I called Jason and told him I was in. I didn't need to think about it any longer. The decision had already been made in my heart, even if I hadn't fully realized it yet. We drove out to the lake that weekend, the drive filled with light conversation, laughter, and the kind of ease that only comes with time spent with someone who understands you. The lake was exactly as Jason had described, peaceful, serene, a perfect escape from the noise of the world. The cabin we stayed in was cozy and welcoming, with a large window overlooking the water. It was the kind of place where you could sit in silence for hours and still feel completely at peace. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. Nothing. I didn't worry about work or family obligations. I didn't think about the endless list of tasks that always seemed to hang over me. I simply let myself exist in the moment, surrounded by nature, in the company of someone who cared. It was during one of our long walks by the lake that Jason turned to me, a serious look on his face. "You know," he said quietly, "I've been thinking. You've spent so much of your life giving to others, making sure everyone around you is okay. But I think it's time for you to let yourself be taken care of too. You've earned that." I stopped walking for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't just about the weekend or the trip. It was about something deeper, something I hadn't fully allowed myself to accept before, that I, too, deserved kindness, care, and attention. I hadn't let myself need anyone, hadn't allowed myself to be vulnerable enough to admit that I, too, needed help. But there, by the peaceful waters of the lake, I realized how much I had been denying myself. "Maybe I've been a little too proud," I said softly, my voice catching in my throat. "Maybe I've been so focused on taking care of everyone else that I forgot about myself." Jason nodded, his expression softening. "It's okay. We all do it. But you don't have to anymore." We continued our walk, the silence between us comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding that I was finally letting go of something I had been holding onto for far too long. By the time we returned home, I felt a sense of peace that had been missing from my life for years. It wasn't just the trip or the break from routine. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to open up to someone else, to accept their care, their kindness. And that, in itself, was a gift I had never given myself before. In the days that followed, I found myself carrying that peace with me. I was still the same person, still the one who cared for others, but now I understood the importance of caring for myself, too. Jason had shown me that I didn't have to be strong all the time, that it was okay to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to let someone else show up for me. And in doing so, he had given me the greatest gift of all, the permission to be human, to be both giver and receiver, to accept love and care just as much as I gave it. For the first time in years, I felt truly whole. As I sat on the porch one evening watching the sunset, I realized that life wasn't just about doing, achieving, and giving. It was about finding balance between caring for others and allowing them to care for you. And with that understanding, I knew I was finally ready to embrace whatever came next with an open heart and a newfound sense of peace.